To introduce you to the spinal cord, we're going to talk about reflex arcs. And these are simple neural pathways. By the way, this is a vocabulary term. So what is a reflex arc? It is a simple neural pathway. And these are neural processes controlled by the spinal cord. There are two reflex arcs that I want you to know. One is the stretch reflex, and the other is the pain withdrawal response. Here we have a diagram of the human spinal cord. This is a cross-section as indicated by the CS, and you're basically looking down at a spinal cord after it has been cut. And what I want you to notice is that there's an area in the center. It should be sort of butterfly-shaped, grayish, although I colored it in blue, sorry. And it's surrounded by a white area. The gray area of the spinal cord in the center is composed of nerve cell bodies, while the white tissue surrounding the gray is composed of nerve fibers. So basically, if you have neural input coming from other parts of the body to the spinal cord, it will connect up within that gray central area of the spinal cord. If you have information traveling up and down the spinal cord, then it travels up and down the white tissue or those nerve fibers. We're going to be talking about the stretch reflex first, and I expect that you're already familiar with this phenomenon. Imagine that you are sitting with your legs crossed and a physician is approaching you with a rubber mallet and taps you just under your kneecap. What is going to happen? You're going to kick your leg. That's the stretch reflex. It is automatic, reflexive, and controlled by your spinal cord. If someone is in an accident or experiences spinal cord damage, even become paralyzed, a tap on the knee can still result in the stretch reflex. The leg will still kick. Here's a diagram of what happens during that stretch reflex. Once again, you're looking at a cross-section of the spinal cord. In the center is a butterfly-shaped kind of gray tissue surrounded by white tissue. I've also drawn another body part, and it is intended to be a leg with muscles in the thigh showing there. If someone is tapped on the knee, just below the kneecap, then the leg kicks. This is a stretch reflex. And there are only two types of neurons involved here. One is a sensory neuron and the other is a motor neuron. So I've drawn a sensory neuron traveling from the leg to the central part of the spinal cord, and I've drawn a motor neuron going back from the spinal cord to the leg. So this is a simple neural pathway. You can't get more simple than this. You have a sensory neuron picking up information about sensation, the fact that the knee was tapped, carries that message to the spinal cord, and then it communicates to a motor neuron that travels back to the leg and causes the leg to kick. You have a motor response. One thing I want you to notice, it's not important right now, but notice that my two neurons are not actually touching within the spinal cord. There's a gap between them. This becomes important later, and that gap is called a synapse. What's important now? You have a reflex arc, a simple neural pathway, a stretch reflex. Information is picked up by your sensory neuron, which is also, here's a vocabulary term, referred to as afferent. And that information travels to the spinal cord, where that information is passed to an efferent motor neuron, and your leg kicks. Sensory neurons are referred to as afferent, while motor neurons are referred to as efferent. Now, I've mentioned that if someone is in an accident or the spinal cord is damaged, then you can still see this reflex occurring. What I also should point out about it is that once the spinal cord is damaged, the lower part of the body is disconnected from the brain, and an individual no longer has inhibitory control of the stretch reflex. For someone whose spinal cord is intact, think about it. If you're sitting with your leg crossed and somebody taps you on the knee with a little rubber hammer, you can stop your leg from kicking. You have inhibitory control over the stretch reflex. But if someone has had spinal cord damage disconnecting the brain from the lower body, then there is no inhibitory control by the brain, and the individual's leg will kick. Now let's talk about the second type of reflex arc that I want you to know, the pain withdrawal response. I know many people like walking barefoot, I do myself, And if you happen to be walking down the street barefoot and your big toe comes into contact with a sharp piece of glass, then the pain withdrawal response is likely to occur. And if you look at this diagram I've shown regarding the pain withdrawal reflex, what you'll see is that there are 3 types of neurons now. You have the afferent sensory neuron picking up information about what happened at the big toe, hey, tissue damage. And then you have the efferent motor neuron traveling from the spinal cord toward the foot so that someone will lift their foot away from the piece of glass. But there's a 3rd type of neuron in there between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron, and so it's called an interneuron. Inter means between. It is still a simple neural pathway, a reflex arc, but it's a little more complicated than the stretch reflex. Why? Think about it. If you're walking down the street barefoot and your big toe comes in contact with a piece of glass, then you not only want to lift your foot away from the piece of glass, you need to get your other leg ready to support your weight. And so that's the function of the interneuron. It is sending messages to other neurons in your other leg to get it ready to support your weight. So it's highly adaptive. Think about it. If you had to rely on your brain to lift your foot away from a sharp piece of glass and get your other leg ready to support your weight, that would take too long. By then you would have really damaged your toe. So here's what does not happen. You experience damage to your toe. That information travels along an afferent sensory neuron to the spinal cord. And here again, this is not what happens. It has to travel up those white nerve fibers to the brain. The brain realizes what's happening, sends a command down the spinal cord where an efferent motor neuron causes your leg to lift away and your other leg to get ready. That's not what happens. It would take too long. It is evolutionarily adaptive that this is a reflexive response controlled by the spinal cord.